Well, good morning. The presentation today is really geared to couples in their mid-30s and probably people who are, who have children, who have to make decisions about finances and, doing some long-term planning in terms of, how to pay for kids and all those decisions that go into that. And I know that my wife and I sometimes talk about what it was like when we were in our 30s and raising 3 kids. And the best that we can remember is that life was a blur. And there's just so much going on and just a scramble to try to keep track of everything and take care of everything and running on mother's time and just all the many pressures that you have. And so the presentation today is, going to be focused on really one question, and that's the question. Can you afford debt? And the answer is going to be different probably for every person. Now, we have a mixed age group in here, and, there are probably people who don't have any debt and haven't had any debt, perhaps never had any debt. And then there are other people who are struggling with debt. Some of you could be too far in debt, and so we're going to take a look at that as well. I don't know anything about any of your personal situations, so when I bring something up, I don't want you to think, how did he know that? I told Ryan in confidence, how did he know that? That really is about me. So that's not true at all. I don't know anything about you at all. So I'm just going to be talking about, what some of the research says, what some of the data say in terms of, what's happening with debt. I'm not going to be talking about macroeconomic debt. I'm not really going to be talking about sovereign debt, the pigs, Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. I mean, you hear what's going on there. You hear about some of their overspending and some of the things that have happened. I'm not really going to get into that. I'm not really going to get into the national debt, although, some of those things are going to come up. I'm not going to talk about the cause of the economic situation because the economists can't agree on that. There are some things that occurred. The repeal of Glass-Steagall in '97, what that meant. The expansion of credit in the first 10 years of the 2000s. So I'm not really going to touch on that per se. I'll talk a little bit about some of the ratios that are used to sort of get a handle on debt and where you stand. And the worksheet that I've handed out, some of you are probably already working on that, and that's fine. But by the end of this class, this is really the question that you want to answer for yourself. Can you afford your debt? So I'm not going to be critical. I'm not going to tell you things that, I'll give you my opinion. I'm not going to tell you things that you should have done. I'm not going to wag my finger at you or, say, well, gee, how could you have made that decision? I'm not going to get into any of that. If you have questions as we go through this, you can ask me. If I say something that doesn't make any sense or, it's just really too hard to believe, just ask me, where'd you get that information? Do you know what you're talking about? And the answer is no, I don't. So, feel comfortable asking those kinds of questions. I was a high school teacher for a number of years, and I've seen just about everything, so, just throw it at me. I really don't care. I'm ready for it. Okay, just a couple of things. The framework of our discussion today and maybe talking about, what exactly is happening. The first thing I want to start with is, you have some people who say, well, money is the root of all evil. And 1 Timothy 6:10 does not say that. 1 Timothy 6:10 says, for the love of money is a root of all evil. And I think that when we talk about money and debt, and next week when Dave talks about credit, you really have to think about this in terms of tools. Now, I realize, the other thing too is that normally in a couple, like one person sort of takes responsibility for paying the bills and taking care of the finances. And the other person is like, as soon as you bring up money, the eyes glaze over. And I'm sure some of you are saying, oh man, I got a picnic to get to this afternoon. Can this guy hurry up and get us out early? I have to go to the store. I have to make potato salad, all these things that are going on through your mind. And so you don't want to talk about debt. But for 40 minutes, 30 minutes, I guess, what I'd really like you to do is just try to stay focused on some of this. And for those of you who just can't, you can't wrap your minds around debt at all, there are going to be, I think, about 3 or 4 points where I'm going to say this is important. And so you can snap back from where you were and pay attention to those slides. So I'm going to try to make it as easy as possible. Okay. Talking about money, talking about debt is painful. I mean, some of you may be really good at this. Some people are not. So I'm going to try to make it as painless as possible. But money and debt management, credit management, require skills. And you really have to think of your household and your family as a business. This is your business. And like any business, you have to take care of it. And you have to know what's going out, what's coming in, what are the decisions you have to make about expenditures, especially if you have kids. You have to make big decisions about housing, about transportation, about education. All of those things require a knowledge of where you are and what you possess. And so when we talk about money management, debt management, this is not the type of thing that you sort of can just forget about and not think about. You really have to do that. So today, we're going to talk about the biblical foundation for talking about debt, and then we're going to get into the context of debt as it applies to you. And the target audience that I chose was the mid-30 age group. And I did that because when we look at some of the Federal Reserve data and some of the other data in terms of demographics and the financials of people, I picked that mid-30 range. So that's really the target. So some of this may not apply to some of you. When you're talking about decisions about debt and you're talking about finances, you really cannot be guided by inertia. This is, 2010 is a new game. Things have changed, and so you can't, when I say you can't be guided by inertia, you can't just do the things that you've done before, and you just can't do the things that your parents did. I mean, some of the things that your parents did or some of the things that you've done in the past may be very important, may be very helpful, but more than anything else, you really need to take a critical look at your finances. And by critical, I mean you have to examine things very carefully. You have to know where you are. You can't know where you're going until you know where you are. And so, again, on one of the worksheets there with the debt to income ratio, that's going to be important. You don't have to fill that out right now, but some of you probably already have it filled out. You have a calculator. You already know what that percentage is. So we're going to look at that a little bit. And you have to know exactly where you are. And then lastly, you have to have a plan. You have to have a plan. Now, we're not going to be talking about what that financial plan is going to be today. All I'm saying is that, in answering this question about debt, you're going to have to come up with a plan, and there are going to be plenty of well-qualified speakers in the next several weeks who are going to talk about that planning and some of the things that you have to consider. Okay. First of all, the biblical principles. Now, in parentheses, what I've done is I put the references for these. So if you want to go back and check and ask, well, where did you get that information? What else did they say? the references are there of where this came from, just so you have some idea. Now, biblical principles are really different from biblical laws. So when it comes to debt, debt is not a thou shalt not or thou shalt. It's not that type of thing. The Bible doesn't say you should have debt or you should not have debt, but with the principles guide you away from debt. And I think that'll be very clear when you take a look at these. First of all, there are 800 scriptures in the Bible regarding personal finance. And I thought we would go through all 800. No. And I like this one. A debt-ridden society, such as a lot of societies that exist around the world, rely upon a constant expansion of credit. And so, in order to keep the economy going. And so, you have to keep borrowing to keep buying things, to keep everybody employed, to keep the economy growing at a GDP of, let's say, 4 or 5%. But you know where we ended up. Okay, the first biblical principle is debt is not normal. And this is from Deuteronomy, and you can see the reference in the bottom there. And the first word is very important. In this particular passage, and then the next section after this, this is if you fully obey the Lord. And then the next section is if you do not obey the law or obey the Lord. And then it explains all the things that can happen to you. So in this one, it says, if you obey the Lord, then you will lend to many nations, but will borrow from none. Now, again, I'm going to try to stay away. I'm going to try to stay away from anything political because I don't want to get into any of that about who did what. But one of the things that I'm also going to try to stay away from is, should you have debt or should you not have debt? I think these are some of the things that you need to be praying about. You need to be discussing as a family. You need to really decide for yourself in terms of what you should be doing. But I'm going to tell you what the Bible says, and you can look at these passages yourself, and then you will have to make a decision in terms of what you're going to do. Okay, the next one is the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. Now, just from a practical point of view, if you are spending money on debt, that is money that you can't use for something else. I mean, that's just common sense. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that's common sense. If you have to use money for debt, then you can't spend it on something else. The other side of that coin is you can use debt perhaps as an investment to make something better if you feel that it's a good tactic, to borrow. And that depends on what that is. And again, you're going to have to decide, when you should borrow, should not borrow, if you should borrow at all. This is the second principle, do not accumulate long-term debt. I read as I was going through this that there are now mortgages, I don't know where they exist, but there are now mortgages up to 70 years. Dave, do you sell any of those mortgages? Okay. And this is always interesting. I'm sure you all know about this. That after, this is another one from Deuteronomy, that after 7 years you cancel your debts. So on Tuesday, the banks are closed Monday, but on Tuesday, call your bank and say, I've had this mortgage now for 8 years. What's up? Can't you cancel this for me? No.